Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 440. Hey, if you want to download this workbook and follow along, click on my YouTube channel and click on my college website link, and you can download the workbook Excel Magic Trick 440 to 451. Oh, this trick here, this is about array formulas. Now, if you've never done array formulas, this video is probably not for you. This is like some three important advanced points about array formulas. I have a bunch of videos. This list right here, if you download this, if you watch all of these and get it, you'll just be an array formula master. But here in this video, we want to answer these three questions. And actually, Hassan and Bill from YouTube asked these questions, and a few others also. What is the difference between a range and array? So we'll talk about that. What is an array formula? And also, how do you know when you have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter? Because the thing about array formulas is there's some versions that look like array formulas, but they're not because they don't require Ctrl+Shift+Enter. So we want to talk about those three topics. Now, the first thing is, what is the difference between a range and array? It's not too hard. An array is a collection of items or data. And it doesn't matter if it's in a range, cell range that is, an array constant, which is like one of these we'll look at in a second, or array in memory, which usually comes from a part of a formula. That's an array. They can be 1, 2, 3 things. A range is simply one or more cells. So if you click here and we hit F2, we see that this function is using a cell range. So that's it. A range is just a range, a bunch of cells. An array can come from a range, which means cell range, or these other items also. So that's the difference between those two. Now let's look at array. We'll talk about the different types of arrays you can get. First thing is, we got to talk about array syntax. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. You have to house an array, and array formulas, in fact, are also housed with curly brackets. Commas indicate you're moving across the columns. Semicolons indicate that you're moving across the rows. Actually, why don't I highlight this data right here and hit Alt-WG in this version. There it is. You see, if we have some data highlighted in a range 2, 5, 2. Notice we're going from column B to C to D, so we're moving across the columns. You would, in an array constant, organize that row. Well, wait a second. It's in a row? Yes, but it's going from column to column as we enter in new data bits. A column is indicated by a comma. So we have curly bracket 2, comma 5, 2, comma 2, curly bracket. That indicates this. Now, what about rows? Here's a row in a range, 2, 5, 3. Notice it's in a column. But as we move from this 2 to this 5, we're going from 15 to 16. So you have to indicate in your array syntax that you're moving across the rows. Semicolon. So 2, semicolon 5, semicolon 3 with curly brackets around it. Now, the way I memorize this is I just go comma starts with a C, column starts with a C. And then I kind of remember that. And then from that, I derive this one. Two-dimensional, you can have 2, 5, 2, and then separated by commas, and then a semicolon, which means go down to the next row, and then 5, 6, 5. So here we have this. And then we go down to the next row and get this. That is, here's a range. Here's that same data set in array syntax. All right. Now, array constants can be in a formula. No way. That's some function with array syntax. I don't know why you'd ever want to do this, but there are examples when you do want array constant. But there it is. That formula right there does the same thing as this one. Here's an example of when you do want to use array syntax. Our goal is to add the two largest. So the large function, and instead of this single k, we just put an array syntax. Give me the first and second largest, and then the sum function will add it. Now, interestingly enough, we'll see in a moment when we define array formula. Array formula requires Ctrl+Shift+Enter, but watch this. I'm going to hit Enter, and it calculates. Right? So array constants like that right there can actually appear in lots of different formulas. And as long as the function itself allows there to be an array, you don't have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. Array constants. Let's go over here. I just did a video, and if you look up here, I have all these videos listed. Functions that can handle array syntax. That's Magic Trick 425. Let's go look right here. So the OR can handle array syntax. The large, the small, VLOOKUP, lookup, index, match. Actually, lots of functions. And in all these cases, like lookup is expecting a table or range of data right there, but it'll accept this array syntax. But look at VLOOKUP. We usually don't think that VLOOKUP will handle array syntax, but it will. And you don't have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. So that's a table that we're, instead of having the actual table lookup, we have our array syntax there. Of course, index and match, and there are others also. All right, so array constants can be very common. Now, another way you can find an array constant is in a defined name. Here's a simple example. All I did is I wanted to add this table here, but I didn't want to mess up the spreadsheet with the data in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to Control F3 and look at Data Table. And I'm going to click Edit. And you can see, sure enough, you can store an array constant right in a defined name. That's in memory, in essence. I'm going to click Close. So that's another way. Now, here's the more common way for array formulas. Arrays can be created in memory in a formula like a text function. Now, I've seen a few things written or said that describe this as in memory. But whatever it is, this is an array being created in a formula, whether you call it memory or not. In essence, it's just not being, it's not coming from the cells or a range. Now, this text function right here, if I click right here, is expecting a single value. Notice we gave it a range, right? Monday, these are dates, right? Serial numbers underneath. The text function, we said, hey, look at all those dates, and then give it the custom number format DDD, which means it will show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then we said the text, this text part right here, whenever it's equal to Tuesday, that'll give us a bunch of trues and falses. Now, I'm going to highlight this and hit the F9 key, which is evaluate. I have some notes over here that mention that. And there it is. We get an array in our formula or memory that says true every time there is a Tuesday. I'm going to Control-Z because I don't want to hard code that in. Then the double negatives takes that series of trues and falses and converts them to ones and zeros, which then the sum product adds. By the way, this is Control-Z. This is not an array formula, because we're not using Ctrl+Shift+Enter. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But this is an example of an array. And guess what? When you highlight all this, do you see F9? Do you see that it's got the commas, which means it's got that exact array syntax, Control-Z. So that's how it's being kept in memory, in essence. I'm going to click Escape. So those are the different types of arrays that we can find, whether array constant in a name, or an array created in memory from a text function. And don't forget also, an array can be a range of cells also. So array is the all-inclusive term. Range just means cells. Now let's go on to our next question. And it is, I have to zoom in a little bit here. So our second question, what is an array formula? Well, really there's three parts and that are ORs, and there's an AND. Requires Control-Shift+Enter. And then with Control-Shift+Enter, there are some exceptions. So then we'll go on to the final question here. All right. What is an array formula? Anytime you have a math or comparative operator used on an array instead of individual items. Individual items, you go like this, equals individual item, math operator multiplication, individual item, right? So you can do that. That is not an array formula. But look at this. did all these individual calculations, and then did average. But you don't need to waste this space with an extra column in your spreadsheet if you know how to do an array formula. Sometimes you want to see the individual items, but other times you don't. So watch this. This is an example of using a math operator on arrays. There it is, right in between. We do that. Anytime you have a math operator on ranges, you have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter because it's an array formula, unless you have one of the exception functions that lets you do array. This average function is not one of the exceptions. If you start doing array operations like this, you got to use Ctrl+Shift and Enter, and then it calculates it all in one cell. Notice the curly brackets there. Those curly brackets are put in automatically when you Ctrl+Shift+Enter. Now, let's look at our example we did just up here, right? That is a comparative operator. We created this array right here and said, is it equal to Tuesday, right? So all of these arrays, each one of the items in this array was asked, are you Tuesday? It came out true or false. Now, that's an example of a comparative operator on an array. But some products is one of the exception functions. See, the argument even says it handles arrays. So you don't have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. All right, the second, so that's math or comparative operators acted on arrays, and the function is not one of the exceptions. Then you got to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. The other big important way you know that you have an array formula is a single value argument in a function is given an array. We all know VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP's second argument is a table, so it's always expecting a bunch of values. So that's and I even have way down here index or VLOOKUP, right? Right there. That's a table array. So that's an argument where it's expecting either in a table or an array, right? Let's look at an argument that's not. An argument that's expecting a single value. And here it is. We have this column here, and we want to calculate the mode. But the mode means the one that occurs most frequently, like 4 occurs twice. But we want to exclude all values below 3 or below. So watch it. Here's a mode array formula. But look at this. Inside of mode, we have if. And inside of the if, the first argument is a logical test. And this function, if, is expecting a single true or a single false. We said, hey, look at all of these here and give me which ones are greater than 3. So if I highlight this and hit the F9, forget it. That if function expecting a single value in this argument, we're given an array. We have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter, Control-Z. Now, and then the value of true. Similarly, it's expecting a single value, but we're going to give it an array. By the way, if you highlight all of the if, and right there and hit F9, you can see it just gives you false, 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 and it gives a 4, a 5, and a 5. The mode then looks at the 2 4s and says that's the one that occurs most frequently. So that is an example. Function, argument, expecting a single value. You give it an array, forget it. Ctrl+Shift+Enter. I'm going to use Ctrl+Shift and then tap Enter. All right, another example of when it is an array function, array formula, is there are functions like transpose, forecast, frequency, line, strand, etc. There are more even than that that require Ctrl+Shift+Enter. So for example, we have these values orientated vertically, and we want them horizontally. We have to highlight the range in advance, 3 cells, same dimension this way, but going this way, equals transpose. Notice it says array. Highlight these cells, close parentheses, and now you have to hold Control-Shift and Enter. That is always going to require Control-Shift+Enter. Another odd example, so those are the 3 things, 1, 2, 3. And they require Control-Shift+Enter. We'll see in just an example that there are some functions that'll allow us to not use Control-Shift+Enter. But one other thing, math and comparative operators, you can see how we did this right here. We did the single value times a single value. Some people like to do it this way. They highlight the whole range, and then you say equals, highlight this whole range, times this whole range. Now, this is an example of we're not putting two ranges and an operator inside a function. We're just going to get the individual calculations in the cell. If you were to highlight this right here and hit F9, you could see it delivers separated by semicolons these values, right? I'm going to Control Z. But because we've highlighted the range, we can use Ctrl+Shift and Enter. Now, I virtually never do this kind of calculation. I just do it like that. Some people like it because you can't insert rows, for example, and disrupt your series of calculations. If you right-click Insert, it says forget it, cannot change part of an array. All right, now so one of these three things: math comparative operator, single value argument is given an array, or these functions requires Ctrl+Shift+Enter. But there are some exceptions. Let's look at them. How do you know when to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter? It all comes down to the function and understanding, either reading the help or the function's dialog argument box, or in some cases, like sum product. No matter how many times I read that, sum if, which we'll see down here. No matter how many times I read that help, it doesn't say anything useful about how it deals with arrays. I actually had to post to the Mr. Excel message board, and Houdini gave me some good advice about how that function is working. All right, so ready? How do you know you have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter? When a function is expecting a single item and you give it an array, like we talked about, doing operations on array are these. Here are the exceptions. Some functions like sum product, lookup, index can handle arrays and don't require Ctrl+Shift+Enter. The function argument screen tip even says array. Now, let's look at this example right here. This is counting the Tuesdays where sales are greater than 0. And you could see instead of text, I use weekday this time. That weekday right there is expecting a single serial number. We gave it a range, which is an array of values there. So that converts it to an array. And we said equal to 3 because weekday spits out 3 for Tuesday. We also had a second array. That right there in the argument of sum product, it says array, so it's going to allow an array without Ctrl+Shift+Enter. That gives me a bunch of 1s and 0s. I click here. This is just excluding the 0 values. That's my second array. These are definitely arrays, but because they're in the sum product and sum product it can handle arrays, we don't have to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. So I hit Enter, and it calculates. Here's another example, look up. Now here we have the blue dog went home. And anytime we have a phrase like this, we want this phrase to be looked up over here, find the fact that there was a blue somewhere in this text string, and return a 2 to this cell. This formula right here, lookup, we're going to use the search. And search is expecting a single value here, find text. But we're going to give it a bunch of values. And we're saying, hey, find any of these with inside that phrase there. Now, search returns the position of the text. So it returns something like, but it's going to return an array. So if I highlight those right there and hit the F9 key, it shows a value error of 5 because that word blue is the 5th character in that string value. So that's returning an array. Control Z. But look at this. The argument for lookup, if I click right there, it's either lookup vector if you have 2, which we do, or array. It handles array. So it'll find the biggest number. I just gave it a number bigger than could ever possibly be given in this situation. There's no text strings greater than 100. So it's going to 100. Lookup finds the 5 and then returns whatever from this range. So it'll get a true for the blue and return the 2. Notice when I hit Enter, I didn't have to do Ctrl+Shift+Enter. Finally, index. If we want a formula that finds the first non-blank and we don't want an array formula, you could use this. Now, I'm not going to go through the logic of how this formula works, but suffice it to say, this index right here, that is an array. It says the ones that are not blank. So if I hit F9, that's an array being created there in our formula. Control Z. But that function index can handle that array. So I'm going to hit Enter, and it finds the first non-blank. If I change this to 12, that formula returns a 12. But there's exceptions to the exceptions. Can you believe this? And this is where it comes down to just knowing your functions. If is one of the exceptions. Even if you put, right, some product is heralded, this is the function that can handle arrays. But forget it. If you have an if function, like we saw earlier, that first argument, you got to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter no matter where it is. So here's an example. If instead of that last formula, I'm going to use this sum product one here, I say, scroll down here, right here, weekday, and instead of having a second array, I put this if construction to eliminate the zeros here. If I put this, that logical test is expecting a single value, so forget it. If I hit enter, some product gives you a value error, and that's one of the big mistakes people make when they're learning this. You're like, wait a second, I thought some product. Forget it. The if function argument trumps the fact that the sum product can handle an array. And that's one of those ones you just have to remember. Another important oddity is the sum if. Now, sum if I try to do this calculation right here, which is very common. People try to put arrays into the range argument. But no matter how hard you try, I'm going to do Ctrl+Shift+Enter. This message says forget it. And the problem with this message is it doesn't say anything useful like, hey, sum if can't handle arrays. And even if you go to help, it doesn't tell you that. So I'm going to click OK. At least I couldn't find it, and I've read it a bunch of times. Houdini at Mr. Excel message board gave me a great post about that. But sum product in this case, of course, will handle that array. Now, here it gets even weirder than this. The sum if, count if, average if, sum ifs, all of those functions can't handle arrays. But it's only the first argument, right? And let me go back up here and just show you something. That first argument, what does it say? It says range. So there actually is a hint that that is expecting a range only. An array doesn't work there. So I'm going to click Escape. COUNTIF is similar, except for watch this. It gets even weirder. That's why you really have to know your functions. Now look at this. Range, just like the sum if, we're allowed to put this range there. It's not this array that we created using the text function. But look at this. The criteria argument in both COUNTIF and SUMIF right there can handle this range of values or an array. So that is important about the COUNTIF. The first argument not going to handle arrays, but the second argument will. It's a single criteria being expected, and we give it multiple values. All right, so that's a bunch about the difference between a range and an array, what is an array formula, and when to use Ctrl+Shift+Enter. And the bottom line is you got to know your functions. You got to know the exception. These are the functions that don't allow them. And then there's some that require them no matter what, like the if, and some that'll never handle them, like SUMIF. All right, we'll see you next trick.